shot with your favourite cuzzies. That's right, the bogans are out, the cuzzies are in. James, welcome back from your gallivanting.
Regular programming has returned, listeners.
I'm not sure what regular programming is this year. I feel like...
Well, no, actually, producer Nick was only telling me on Friday that the ratings, so the number of people tuning in to listen over the past month is the highest that we've ever had, and it happened to coincide with my absence. So I feel like I'm back on trial here. I've tried to really do my preparation for today's podcast to try and make sure that Mitch doesn't permanently snag my spot.
I think Mitch has just learnt how to use Fiverr, where you go online, you pay $5 to buy some bots. So I think he's bought some bots.
Well, he's done a good job. Keep it going, Mitch. Keep it going if you can.
Bots
it's giving
away.
It's making us look nice. Keep those bots rolling.
Bots away.
And you are off tomorrow to Israel. First time as a converted Judaism practicer to go to the motherland.
Yes, I'm a Jew. I'm Jewish. Yes, that's correct. Not derogatory. It's what I am. Yeah, first time since, been many times, going with the dad and the brother. Cannot wait. Yeah, just can't believe I'm going away again this year. These people must just think I'm absolutely off my rocker. And they would be right in thinking that. But I'm only away for a week. So Mitch will come in, Mitch and the bots, and then back out. And then hopefully, we'll reach Christmas at some point, Kelsey. But you, let's turn this back around. It's not about me. It's about you. You gallivanted, we heard from you, you sent us some data to put on the pod most weeks, like seriously, get alive. And then you came home and everyone was waiting for the stories of, you at Oktoberfest, but instead you came back with your learnings from, what kind of density they're performing around transport hubs. Like, I just don't have a lot to say. I'm impressed.
I mean, where do I go with that? I spent time in the UK, in Spain, in Italy, Austria and Germany. It was awesome. I loved it. My wife is pregnant. We've got a baby coming. So obviously can't be taking her to Oktoberfest, or at least she wouldn't like to be going there. So no, we missed Oktoberfest. We did go to Munich, but on the just after the Oktoberfest had finished. And I guess Europe, great place. First time I've ever been to Europe, so I found it culturally to be a very good experience.
Flavoursome.
I love how they, really treat Sunday as a sacred day. In a lot of parts, the parts that I went to at least, you can hardly get to a shop on a Sunday. They're just not open. So I sort of like that.
I would give for siesta times.
Yeah, it forces you to try and spend the time with your friends and family, I guess.
Too true.
And look, inflation wasn't everywhere, but what they're really worried about, and I say they as in, just the regular people that you come across, is the energy costs. Apparently their energy costs have gone up by 50% since the start of this year. So that's like their power and gas and all that. And it was really topical in the newspapers, in everyday discussions, because they're heading into winter. So there's concerns that they're not that the price is going up, but that they'll have enough energy. And, it makes me grateful that we live in Australia, in a country, one of only 6 countries in the whole world where we produce enough food and energy to not only provide for ourselves but actually export it. That's a really rare thing, and you don't sort of sometimes, I didn't realise that until I'd sort of been to these other places that rely on importing food and energy to get their economy and people surviving.
Yeah, crazy, amazing. So that was your big sort of takeaway. Everyone's talking about the same thing all around the world, really, but I suppose they're just coming into winter and facing a little bit more of a stress off the back of that.
No, like my main takeaway was that I love Europe because it's a cool cultural experience, and I love pasta, I love pizza, I love wheat beers, wheat beer, they call it wheat beers. I love schnitzel, I love sauerkraut. I love all the food and the beers, but no, it was just interesting, to sort of, I don't know about you, but I like going to a foreign place, picking up the local rag, if I can get it in English, and just trying to understand what are they talking about, and does it differ to what we talk about?
Now, I've just heard someone say local rag about 3 hours ago, and I had to figure out what it was. The local rag, it's a
newspaper.
Terrible word.
Local newspaper.
I figured. Now, interestingly, and call it a segue, but the the big boy, the CEO at Lendlease, Tony Lombardo, he's actually gone over to the UK recently, maybe chasing your tail, cuz he likes schnitzels and the local rag there also. And he's talking about in the AFR last week how he really wants to push Lendlease to bring BTR, build to rent, into Australia like big time. And build to rent is like, it's a very industry phrase, but for those who don't quite understand what it is, build to rent is very simple. It's basically a whole building of apartments that are kept by the developer and never sold. They're built for the sole purpose of renting. It's not only done with apartments, it's sometimes done with townhouses, even house and land.
Very common in America.
Oh, massive in America, massive in the UK, cuz. And because of affordability with rents and affordability with buying, there's a lot of big institutional money that are talking about really pushing that in Australia. The biggest hindrance, and we've talked about it before, is actually the tax implications on holding an asset that big, which is starting to change a little bit. But very interesting that they're really pushing, or this CEO is pushing for that pivot for Lendlease away from generic construction and development and into that, what he calls blue chip status investments, where they buy and literally hold, so it's an income producing asset forever.
Yeah, and I guess, the takeaway is they're the most successful property company in Australia. Maybe Stockland could make a claim that they're the most successful, but it'll be one of them or Lendlease. And clearly the message is, if it's good enough for them, it should be good enough for the everyday person. I think a lot of property investors, the average property investor sells their property within 5 to 6 years. It's really not the right strategy, is it? You're just better off taking that long-term view, buy, hold, rent it out, because, the values go up over time. But the reason these guys are doing it is because they're realising, and they know, rents go up over time as well, and it actually often follows inflation. So when you've got high inflation like we have today, your rents will be going up by the same amount, if not more.
Amen to that. And you said rents outperform inflation by some 2.5% per annum, and they have done for the last 20 years.
2% historically, yeah, and they're doing more than that today. I think their inflation's about 6% in Australia today. Rents are up by 10% per annum. So if you get like a couple of years of 10% rental growth, that makes a massive difference to the return that you get on your property, or any investment for that matter. It doesn't just relate to property, of course. Any investment where you get a cash flow increasing by 10% is huge.
Ain't that the truth? All right, so because affordability is no doubt key, right? And I have to say, there was just a little bit of joy in my acquisitions heart last week when there was a table of the highest growing quarterly change, the fastest growing quarterly change suburbs in Australia, and that was for the last quarter. Butchered that, but you get what I'm saying. And interestingly, the top 12 were either South Australia or the Northern Territory. Main reason being they're just affordable. So their house price quarter on quarter is still pumping, and these are houses. Now, in that top 5, you've got some really interesting suburbs in South Australia, Elizabeth Grove, sort of these other pockets of Elizabeth, Daverin Park, Andrews Farm, and further down a more regional town of Two Wells. Now, I point these out, and they gave me some glee in my acquisitions heart, because these were areas that we identified 2 or 3 years ago as high growth because of affordability, established amenity, established rail stations, schools and shopping centres, and so affordable with also a population growth forecasted. Now, these areas are traditionally, or years ago, housing commission. And they had these housing commission stigmas that were actually evolving outwards and sort of becoming extinct over time. And they've proven to have, which put a lot of people off, but they've proven to have some of them here as high as 8% growth just for the last quarter. 8%, 7%, Andrews Farm just above 5%. It's really amazing.
I think what we're seeing is the smaller capital cities are taking over in terms of like the property growth cycle, and that's just history repeating itself, because every time that the property markets go up in value, Sydney and Melbourne, the biggest capital cities, lead that, as they have done over the past 5 to 10 years. And then what happens is they become a little bit less affordable, to your point. They become a bit congested. The quality of life isn't as good. So you start to see those more affordable, smaller capital city markets, Brisbane, Adelaide, to your point, and there's some there in Perth as well. They start to take over because people chase that affordability. And, the property market's a big thing, and a lot of people get caught up in the headlines. There's still value and there's still growth out there if you can adjust to what's happening, which today is going after those smaller capital city markets, isn't it?
Absolutely. And look, it's not just a buy cheap and cheerful. You still got to do your research, and you've got, but sticking to that affordability is smart. Absolutely. From both a purchase and a rental perspective.
Yeah, agree. And just on that, by the way, it's going back a step in our conversation, but I saw that Vancouver in Canada got a massive affordability problem for rentals and property prices.
Yes.
And they've got a new mayor who's come out and said the whole solution is supply. He said, I'm not going to put any more incentives for first-time buyers. It's going to be just about supply. So he's literally rezoned anything within 5 kilometres of a transit centre can go unlimited height, no red tape. Basically, this whole, kind of completely unshackling all the restrictions, because his whole point in his campaign to get elected was that there's just all these single family homes on a block of land sitting, within 200 metres of a train station when they should be high rises. I thought it was interesting because, you prompted me for it earlier, but I missed your cue. Going around Munich and London, literally within 10 kilometres of the CBD, everything's 6 stories. Like there's no single story, whereas in Sydney and Melbourne, the bigger capital cities in Australia, it's almost the other way around, where the majority of housing, in that 10K ring is actually a house on a block of land. So I thought, look, Vancouver, real interesting case study, but, it's pretty bold. They're pretty desperate over there, one of the most unaffordable markets in the world. But it may be a bit of a success story if they can get it off the ground for other bigger cities to follow.
Absolutely. And I did say as a last note there that even the 3 councillors sitting sort of next to him in the running race all agreed as well to basically push that through. So it is obviously very necessary.
It's morphing time.
Listeners, you could not make this up. Alex has gone on holiday. She's gone to the airport, and we were probably 2/3 of the way through the podcast, and her computer has run out of battery.
Old Alex taking leave Fitzgerald.
It is, you couldn't make it up. So fortunately, Mitch, like always, you're studying the notes beforehand anyway, and you were ready to seize your opportunity, weren't you?
Mate, I was sitting out the front, and I thought there's not a chance I'll be getting a gig today. And then, lo and behold, I heard the sign-off noise that Zoom makes, and I was in here before she was even gone.
That's all right, because I'll tell you what, the next item, and it may have been strategic anyway, because we were going to next talk about the budget and tax cuts and what it means for the everyday person, and there's some numbers in here. So whether maybe Alex strategically sort of shut off her computer because she didn't want to talk about this. Either way, you are the man for the job. Tell me, I'm going to start this one a little bit unorthodox fashion. Have you ever been asked or thought about how much tax you'll pay in your working life?
I've never been asked, and I try not to think about it, James. So to answer your question, it's a no on both fronts there. However, I think
most Australians would say that. Most people. I think most people would say that, right? Like I certainly. Who wants to know that number? Like it's probably not going to be the nicest number to be confronted with, is it?
No, but I feel as though you're going to confront me with it. So what have you come up with?
Well, look, I don't. Ultimately, you do a general answer for this. So it'll vary depending on the individual, because you pay different tax amounts depending on your income. But it came up recently in a conversation that I was having, and I did some back of envelope numbers. The average Australian earns $90,000 per annum.
90,000, yep.
90,000. So, and if you earn $90,000 per annum, you pay no tax up to $18,000. Then you pay about 20 cents on the dollar up to 37, or in fact, I think up to $40,000 now. And then from $40,000 to $120,000, you pay 32.5%. Or in fact, sorry, from $40,000 to $90,000, you pay 32.5%. Then 37% up to $180,000. So between 87,000 and 180, and then above $180,000 you pay 45%. So obviously, if you earn more, you're going to be paying more tax. So the average punter, the average Australian earns $90,000. That means they would pay $20,000 a year in tax. Now, you could take it a few different ways from here. How long do you think the average Australian works for in their life?
Look, you probably, you obviously have your part-time jobs early, but let's take those out of the equation for the purpose of this example. But you'd start working full-time, I reckon, at around the age of 20, the average Australian. And look, your probably working life now spans over 50 years. You work, up to about 70 years of age, thereabouts. Hopefully not the whole time if you can avoid it. But let's say 50 years is the average working span of an Australian today.
Yeah, and hopefully over time the income grows as well as you become a little bit more senior and experienced and whatnot. But let's just do real basic, clean numbers. $20,000 a year in tax. If you work for 50 years, that means you pay $1 million in tax in your working life. It's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money. It's a whole house it's not quite a house in Sydney, but it's a house in most capital cities.
It's a house in the average capital city in Australia, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It's 2 in Adelaide.
Yeah, that's damn true.
It's a lot of money, isn't it? So, look, and I guess that hopefully that gives some listeners perspective, because it is then therefore important, that the government was proposing and is proposing to reduce our tax. So all the way back 5 years ago, the Liberal government at the time said we're going to reduce the tax rate for people. So what we're going to do is we're going to move the amounts where you get the lower tax amounts apply, and we're going to actually get rid of the 37% bracket, which was huge, because what it meant is that a lot of people who were under 100, in fact, it was anyone under $200,000 was going to be paying only 32.5% tax rather than the 37.5% and 45% that applies today. So for those people, it was going to pretty much anyone over $120,000, it was going to save them anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 a year, which is pretty significant. When you're paying $20,000 a year, even if it's only $2,000 over a 50-year working life, that's $100,000 in your working life. So it's not. Although it seems like a small amount, it makes a huge difference over your working life. The Labor government have unveiled, in fact, their budget this week. They're getting rid of the tax changes. It was stage 3 that was the big one, that was getting rid of a whole tax bracket for pretty much anyone earning between $90,000 and $200,000. And I guess their argument is that anyone earning that amount of money is a high income earner. And, you might, depending on where you see the world, you know, whether you think that's fair or not, and whether that's right or wrong. But what it will do is it will definitely have a big impact on a lot of Australians.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to summarise what you're saying is that the stage 1 and 2 tax reform, so the previous stages, they've all been rolled out.
Yeah.
Stage 1 targeted your low income earners, or low in the eyes of the
stage one.
To low.
Stage 1 was really nothing. It moved the 32.5% bracket from 87,000 to 90,000. So it saved a few Australians. It saved a few Australians a few $100.
Stage 2 was your middle income earners.
The middle.
Yep.
So that was the middle, and that was fairly significant. The main difference that it played is rather than earning or paying tax at 32.5% up to $87,000, you paid it up to $120,000. So it made a fairly significant difference. Would have saved a couple of $1,000s for anyone who was within that sort of $87,000 to $120,000 bracket, which would be sort of the middle income earners, given that the average Australian earns about $90,000 per annum.
And stage 3, which they're now scrapping, was to target the higher income earners from $120,000 to $200,000. So anyone earning $200,000, for example, under the stage 3 tax cuts would have paid about $9,000 and $9,075 less in tax under the stage 3 reform. So they're no longer going to be receiving that benefit.
Correct.
And
anyone, and for listeners, depending on what your income is,
120, same thing at 1,875. So nothing to sneeze at.
So those numbers, even at $80,000, it's costing. It means it would have meant a saving of $1,000 a year in tax, which isn't going to apply anymore. At $120,000 a year, if you earn that amount of money, it's about $2,000 a year that you would have saved in tax but won't anymore. $150,000 a year, it was $4,000. $180,000 a year, it was $6,000. And then, as you say, anyone above $200,000, it was just over $9,000, which when you have a 50-year working life, it sort of sucks. They put it up there. It's been talked about for 5 years, and Jim Chalmers, big bad Jim Chalmers, unfortunately, has taken away those tax cuts, which and it impacts a lot of Australian workers. Probably about 60% of the workforce will be affected. So, Mitch, it would be remiss of us to talk about tax and probably make people, ourselves included, painfully aware of how much tax we're going to pay in our working lives without offering a little bit of hope, and that is that there are ways to reduce your tax, aren't there? And they're legal ways. There's probably many illegal ways, but we're just going to keep to the legal ones for now. There are legal ways to reduce paying tax, isn't there?
Now, there certainly is. And as I said last week when we touched on tax, this by no means constitutes tax advice. We would certainly not be doing that. But there's certainly ways that you can take advantage of, the rules to reduce your taxable income. Obviously, any expenses that you incur in relation to your employment, you can use to, deduct, or a deduction as they're called, to reduce your taxable income. And obviously there's...
That could be like a computer.
Buy a computer for work, set up a home office, internet charges for, work-related travel expenses in some instances, all of that type of thing that you incur as a result of fulfilling your employment. And of course, there's ways that you can reduce your taxable income by investing or through investments. And, obviously we sort of take a view on, property context, and certainly people investing in property, they can reduce their taxable income by costs incurred in relation to running that property. And that includes things like, paying maintenance costs for, anything to do with the house, interest component on your repayments under the mortgage, lots of different things that you can do, depreciation, talk to your accountant about all the things that are available there. So, taxes are going up.
The big one, obviously, though, is interest on your loan and depreciation of the home. And
they're the biggest items.
Depreciation's probably the most handy one because it's not one that you actually pay out of your pocket. It's what they call a paper loss. So over the, basically whatever the house cost, you can depreciate that and it comes off your income. So $200,000 house, you probably get at least $10,000 a year on that house for the first 10 years that you can depreciate off your income. So if you earn $100,000 and you would pay, $30,000 in tax, instead the tax department would see that you pay $90,000 in income or earn $90,000 in income, adjusted for the $10,000 in depreciation, and that would probably save you $2,000 or $3,000 a year in tax, which you get back in your pocket instead. Which, look, I'm all for tax; it has to be paid, but I certainly think that it is silly to pay as much tax as we do if there are legal ways for you to not only reduce your tax, but at the same time do something for your financial future.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can get your tax back in different ways too, which is, quite interesting. You can actually get it back in your pay packet each week, fortnight or month by a tax variation, or you can hold off and get it back in a lump sum at the end of your financial year. Now, I'm definitely getting too close to talking about the particulars and constituting tax advice, so please go and speak to a professional about that.
You know what? Let's find an accountant. We'll do it. We'll do a guest.
Okay, yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah,
we'll get a guest, an accountant, property accountant on for those who are interested. And,
little quick shots drop.
And look, there's probably ways to do it with other investments as well. We don't know about them, so we're not going to talk about them. I'm sure, though, that there's many other investments, not just property, where you can use those investments as a way to reduce tax as well. Let's talk about the Victorian election. It's probably timely that you're here because this is something that real delicate around our girl Alex, because she's firmly opinionated on and she tries to sort of make out that she's not heavily biased towards one particular political party, it's
not doing a great job of hiding that, is she?
It's not hidden well. Dan Andrews is going up for re-election at the moment, and he's come out with, I got to say, an impressive policy when it comes to housing affordability. He's got an incentive here, which is going to basically put up a 25% deposit for first home buyers from the Victorian government, which will mean that those first home buyers, if they're Victorian and buying a house in Victoria, would only have to put in a 5% deposit. So it sounds similar to the federal government Labor incentive.
Yes.
But there are some differences, aren't there?
Yeah, there is. Absolutely. So, this one in particular is eligible for those earning under $128,000 as a single or joint under $204,800. So in order
Which is
to
nearly double what the federal government's restrictions were.
Correct. So, would open it up to more people. And you might recall we actually discussed a similar thing that the New South Wales government were rolling out as well, but for workers in essential services. So, but I understand this is eligible for anyone meeting those income thresholds, and you avoid paying lender's mortgage insurance, as you alluded to there. Obviously, normally if you were entering into a property with a 5% deposit and borrowing the rest, you would be eligible to pay lender's mortgage insurance. In this instance, given you've got the state government chipping in the 25%, you avoid that as well. So look, really quite good. And as far as, I guess, how they get it back, which is probably what most listeners are wondering, they get it back upon the sale of the home. And now this is one option how they get it back. So upon the sale of the home, and it's 25% of the market value at the time of the sale. So it's not fixed. So they do get a capital gain if there is growth in the market. And they've also limited the areas that this is available to, eligible areas across Victoria. So they're obviously mindful that, they're wanting to be in areas that they deem to be ones that are going to grow. And the second way they get it back is if the purchasers trigger an income, if their income increases over a certain amount, then they will be required to start paying it back at that point, even regardless of if they've sold it or not. So interesting though, if you read the fine print, there are, you certainly be careful with all of this.
Well, he's got to get re-elected first. Having said that though, he is a very short-priced favourite, Dan Andrews, to be re-elected.
That's amazing on it. You like given. Anyway, we're not going to go there, but that is quite amazing.
I do find that amazing.
Yeah. There was.
There'll be a good movie or book about how he's repaired his public image at some point.
Hasn't he? What?
Hey, the other thing, just to round out, you talked about how the income thresholds are much higher under this Dan Andrews proposed incentive. So are the house prices. So the federal government was saying they put a cap on the house price at $850,000 if it was near Melbourne. Dan Andrews has bumped that up to $950,000 for the state government incentive. And even in regional Victoria, the cap was $550,000 under the federal scheme. This one is bumped up to $600,000. So it is across the board a very, very generous first home buyers incentive from Dan Andrews, which looks like it will probably come in effect from early next year. I thought we'd finish on some cool data because, and we'll call this the stat fact. I gave stat fact to Alex this week, but who knows what that was going to be because she's run out of battery.
Stat fact.
The stat man.
Stat fact.
Or at least I get to hear the stinger, my favourite.
Exactly. Hey, if I was to, and I can do this to you because you probably haven't read this far into the run sheet because I put it at the end. We've had a breakdown from a group called PropTrack. And PropTrack, I don't know if you've noticed, but they must be a new property research company. They have been coming out with a lot of pretty cool data on the housing market. They've broken down the housing types by capital city, and then within the capital city, they've looked at houses versus units, 4 bedrooms versus 3 bedrooms, and looked at all the different housing types to actually do a study and some data on what properties and types of properties in which areas are growing the fastest. So tell me, if I was to ask you which area and type of housing do you think would have grown the most from a rental point of view in the last 12 months? What do you think it would be and where do you think it would be?
So the first thing I think is that what would drive that is population growth. And over the last 12 months, I think that Southeast Queensland would have recorded the highest amount of population growth, given it was largely interstate migration that was driving that. And so therefore in Southeast Queensland, I'd probably narrow it down to somewhere around the capital city. So let's go Greater Brisbane, and I'd say it would be houses, given that, people were probably working from home and valued space more than units. So I'm going to say Brisbane and I'm going to say houses, James. How have I gone?
He's pretty good. That's why he does what he does. That's why he's got the job he's got. He looks after all our research and you bang on. The rents are up by 10% across Australia in the past 12 months. Houses in Brisbane up by 17%, so nearly double. That's a huge amount of growth. Regional WA houses were actually second, coming in at 14%. Adelaide houses at 13%, and then there's a bunch of them at about 12%.
That's interesting, because that is in order of the interstate migration numbers. WA being second, Adelaide being third. So there you go.
You've one up me there because I didn't know that. Hey, this is fortuitous too because I obviously wouldn't have been able to put this in the run sheet had Alex been here at the end, but you and I have got a little race on Sunday. This time last year, you roped me into the. You said I'm going to sign up for the Noosa Triathlon, and you said, do you want to do it? And I said, I've never done a triathlon. I think I would like to do it, and I've signed up, not realising at the time that I'd go away to Europe and feast on pizza, pasta, schnitzels, and wheat beers for the 3 So I'm very well and truly carb loaded going into this weekend. Who do you think will cross the line first between me and you? And what's your goal? Have you got like a little time? Because you'll be on the podcast next week, so we'll be able to bring this up as a bit of a reference point.
Mate, you've brought that up for one reason and one reason only, because it is an absolute boat race. Who's finishing that first? And you will be finishing absolutely. Yeah, I concede defeat already, particularly given your Strava activity of late. And although you say you've been overseas eating and all that, geez, the 4-minute Ks would suggest otherwise. So I think I'll be in a bit of trouble there. Although, if you do get a flat tyre in the ride and I don't, I might be a chance of crossing over first. But no, in all seriousness, targeting a 25-minute swim leg, targeting a 1 hour 15 or better bike leg, and targeting a 47-minute or better run. So that'll be my goal.
So at about 2.5 hours.
Yeah, plus transition. I might have a spell in transition for a bit. See how it's depending on how we go.
Oh, we've got this on record, don't we, Nico? We can replay this next week. Gee whiz. And then you've taken the couple of days off, so we'll have to do it'll be a late drop next week, guys, that you'll have to keep an ear out for because Mitch won't be back till later in the week and Alex isn't here.
It will be a late drop. In fact, we'll figure it out anyway.
We will figure it out. Hey, Mitch, very well done filling in on short notice. Producer Nick, likewise, just moving the studio around at very short notice.
Jeez, you've done well.
Can we get a bit of, I don't know, we got like round of applause sound
music
effect,
for Nico?
Jordan or Nico?
Hey,
Anyway,
before I
we'll get that put in.
Before I do go though, I give Alex a lot of a lot of crap, let's say, for not preparing and all that type of thing. But she might be onto something because I haven't prepared at all, and I've come in and
some of your best work,
to be honest,
you think?
Probably not even noticeable. So anyway.
Oh, that's enough. Your head's not going to fit out of this room in a moment. Hey, guys, thanks for listening. If you like it, recommend it. We love to hear from you. So we'll do the quick shots later this week. Our emails are in there. We love to hear from anyone and everyone about any questions or things that you might be wondering having listened to the pod or seen things in the news. Have a great week. Talk soon.
See you guys.
Thanks for listening to another episode of The Double Shot with your favourite cousins, Alex and James Fitzgerald. If you've got a burning question or something we absolutely need to talk about on the pod, please write to us. Both of our emails are in the show notes. For little real estate tidbits and a little bit of banter, okay, a lot of banter, you can follow us on the gram. Our handle is thedoubleshot.podcast. That, my friends, is thedoubleshot.podcast. Until next time, think of us when you sit back and sip your next double shot.